this country is, a lot of it, a huge amount of emphasis on financial services. So we have to, above all costs, according to the ruling class, save the banks, save the financial system by putting vast amounts of money into the banks. Second argument they made was that once we've saved the banks by pumping them full of money, the banks will then provide credit. They will give loans to businesses, then businesses will start up, and the economy will start going again. Through doing this, they argued, thirdly, that we will then, if you like, restore our international credibility. If you ever hear them, they always talk about our international reputation. If we save our banks, and the banks are giving out money, our international reputation will be saved. And by that they meant is that by doing this, more financiers will invest in the International Financial Services Centre, more foreign direct investment will come into Ireland, because the government will show it's got the population under control, there's going to be no rebellion, so therefore we can get more foreign direct investment. And through all that, the fourth argument was, this then will mean that we can export more computers, more pharmaceuticals, and through that process, the Irish economy will revive. So save the banks, increase your international reputation, get the banks to lend out, and then the exports will increase, and we will be hunky-dory, and we will get back to a decent economy, their view. Now, the costs, I'll just briefly indicate what this is. This is their strategy. And it's important to know what the cost to society has been. The cost to society has been, as Richard was pointing out yesterday, a phenomenal increase in unemployment, 500,000 people, which even if you look at the official reports, if you look at the IMF, for example, they make it clear there's going to be about 15% unemployment in this country until 2015. But this is, by the way, the optimists. There's not going to be any end to mass unemployment. There's been a situation where a lot of people, I was just trying to find the recent figures, I missed the news yesterday, but 1 in 12 houses in this country, 1 in 12 houses are not paying back their mortgages. Okay? Phenomenal suffering going on in terms of people in mortgages. People have heard what's happened in terms of the cutback in services, and, for example, the most recent increase in the slashing the number of jobs, so that by the end of 2014, they will have slashed 37,000 jobs from the public sector. That has been the strategy, okay? Enormous suffering in order to carry out this particular philosophy. Now, is it actually going to work? And the answer is no. It's as clear as day. There's not a hope in hell is this going to work, right? And therefore, all the suffering that has been imposed on people is totally in vain. Let's just start going back on the argument. First, forget about the domestic economy. Let's put everything into exports. That's what they've said. And on the basis of that, they have predicted, this is their prediction, that the Irish economy will grow by 1.8% in 2012, and it will grow each year after that by 2.8% between 2013 and 2015. Now, I just want to say a word, because people are not obviously familiar with often a lot of economic jargon and so on. If you say an economy is going to grow by, let's say 3%, right? So they're saying the economy is going to grow by 3% up to 2015, that's basically saying we're going to have a boom like we had in the 60s. You know, if you're growing by 3%, that's a boom. That's a pretty healthy economy, right? So they're predicting that this economy, on the basis of exporting, is going to be like in the 1960s. And this is going to happen in the next 3 or 4 years. And based on exports. Well, the problem is, there ain't going to be many exports. The economy is going down. The people who wrote the global economy is not going to have a double-dip recession have got it completely wrong. If you look, for example, there's an interesting thing here in the Financial Times this week, and they show you what's happening in Europe. And you look at every single economy in Europe, and you'll find the growth is around 0. The success story, by the way, for Germany and France was something like they're growing by, was it 0.5? They're growing by 0.5. That's a success, right? This is in complete recession, right? So therefore, the idea that Ireland is going to export its way out of the economy by exporting to countries that are in recession is mad. It just ain't going to work, right? So therefore, the first argument they make is we can export our way out of the economy. That argument is going to fall apart. And therefore, the idea that Ireland is going to grow at the rate of 3% a year is a fairy story. Now, if Ireland doesn't grow at the rate of 3% a year, what's the next thing that happens? The next thing that happens is we then have to come to the famous debt to GDP ratio. Just to explain what this is. The level of debt in the economy, according to these conventional economists, if your level of debt is high, that's not too bad as long as your economy is growing. Because the bigger the economy you have, the more debt you can actually carry. Okay? So that's why they worry about the debt to GDP ratio is growing, right? Now, last year, they predicted that the debt to GDP ratio in 2014 would be 85%. In other words, the Irish economy is about 160 billion. So do your figures. The debt would be what? Brian's good math. 80% of 160 would be what? About maybe 90 billion, right? That would be so that's what they're saying, right? In reality, that's pretty good figures, right? 140. What? 140. Right, okay, 104. Sorry, right. Okay, 104. Okay. Don't worry about the maths. That's the crucial thing. The crucial thing is.
Stop recording there for a minute.
You have to. I admit I don't know about maths. Just to pretend. The debt to GDP ratio, in fact, is going to be 118%. In 2014, the debt to GDP ratio is 118%. Just hold on to the figure. Just call it 120%. Now. There's a problem in Ireland is that you can't measure the size of the Irish economy. When you say gross domestic product, that means the size of the economy, right? So the debt to GDP ratio is going to be 120%. Except Ireland, to quote one economist, he says economic figures are like stories about Elvis Presley on Mars. Because they do not measure the extent to which money is repatriated out of Ireland, okay? So you have to look at what's called the gross national product, which is the size of the economy minus the money that's taken out of the economy. And that comes in at around 130 billion. And therefore the debt to GDP ratio in Ireland is, to quote Carl Whelan, in 2014 it is going to be 150%. Okay? 150%. Now let's just put this in perspective. Greece had a debt to GDP ratio of 180%. And then the thing collapsed. And they said, we're going to have to do something about this. And they have reduced it down to 120%. Right? The Irish debt to GDP ratio is the same as Greece. It's going to be higher in reality. And therefore, what's going to happen? It's bloody obvious what's going to happen. The speculators are having dumbed down Greece, are after Italy, and now Spain. Then they'll come to Belgium, and they'll tinker around with France. And when are they coming after that? They're coming back to this place. And they're going to squeeze this place dry. That's what's going to happen, right? So therefore, the idea that you're going to export your way out of the economy, and then your debt is going to go down, it's total bullshit. Total and utter bullshit. And therefore, this is what is facing the Irish economy. Next, as the economy begins to shrink under this burden of debt, consider what's happening to people on mortgages, right? There are 700,000 people on mortgages in this country. Far from the banks, if you like, lending out more money, ask anybody who's on a tracker mortgage what's happening at the moment. The banks are squeezing you for extra interest all the time. As a result, one in 8 mortgages in Ireland are now in trouble. People are not paying back the mortgage, are only paying back the interest. You're going to have a massive collapse in mortgages, which means that the same banks that we recapitalised to get going again, because a lot of their loans were given out to the Irish property market, are going to be in big trouble. And therefore, the prospect that Ireland is going to be the good boys and girls in Europe, it simply does not make sense. Why then do they make this argument? What are they on about? I mean, it's pretty, when you actually look at it in the plain light of day, it makes no sense. And here you find really the most extraordinary nonsense going on. And what goes on in if you like, the political establishment at the moment is they look at things like the interest rates on bonds, and they continually track the rate of bonds. What's the Irish interest rate on bonds? And what has happened is this. This is what their whole thing is based on. The interest rate on Irish government bonds, if you bought an Irish government bond, a 10-year bond, in July 2010, the interest rate was 5.3%. It then has jumped up to 12%, and it has come back to around 7%. This is what they're cheering themselves about. This is what they think is great. The Irish interest rate on 10-year bonds has come back down to 7%. Big bloody deal, right? It'll go back up again as soon as the speculation begins. Okay, so therefore the Irish economy is in deep trouble. All this attempt to bring about austerity is not going to work. All the hardship is going to be for nothing. There's going to be a second round of speculation against the Irish economy when the so-called bondholders look at Irish government debt, and as a result, this country is going to be Greece in slow motion. There's no question of this. And let me just point out, Every single finance minister for the last 3 years has says, we are not Greece. When Brian Lenihan, for example, when the first IMF bailout took place, Brian Lenihan assured the Irish population, we are not like Greece, we will not need a bailout. 6 months later, we had a bailout. Same argument again, we are not like Greece, we're the good boys and girls. I make a prediction, in a year, year and a half, this country will face the same prospect as Greece. Okay, therefore, what's the situation? And here we have to say something about the level of struggle in Ireland that Richard was talking about last night. Why don't the Irish protest? Why don't they protest? And there's a number of reasons. Richard gave one reason last night, the issue of the ballot box. Let me just give people hoping that the Fine Gael government, the Labour government, will be different Fianna Fáil. Let me just give 2 other reasons. One reason the Irish people do not protest is that we had, 10, 12 years of a Celtic Tiger boom where there was a tremendously successful social engineering to produce what I would call a culture of naive capitalism. Irish people are told time after time, get on your bike, set up an enterprise. You go to the colleges, you go to, for example, UCD. There's a talk each week on entrepreneur. Irish entrepreneur explains to the students how to be an entrepreneur. You go to an art college. You go to an art college these days, you'll do a course on entrepreneurship. If you ask, how does a clown like Sean Gallagher become almost win the presidency? Because you got Dragon's Den, it's this culture of just capitalism stuffed down people's throats for the last 10 years, that had an effect. It had an effect on you. I'm sorry, I mean, you look at our students. It had, now, by the way, I think the students are now waking up. The beginning, but for 10 years, this stuff was stuffed down people's necks. And on top of that then, you have the social control mechanisms. The mechanisms of social partnership, where the union leaders work behind the scenes with the government. Eamon Gilmore, Pat Rabbit, regularly go over to Liberty Hall. I know it's from the inside. They regularly go over to Liberty Hall, they sit down with union leaders there, and they essentially manage discontent. They allow the union leaders, for example, to make a bit of noise, but don't do anything serious. I mean, the most depressing experience I had recently was going to a SIP2 conference. We just heard that the pension age in Ireland is going to be raised to 68. Now, remember we heard last night there's a strike going on in Britain on this. And some of us got up and said, aren't we a union? Shouldn't we be against this? We went to a meeting at SIP2 and said, we don't know. And we had to spend the whole 2 days arguing in SIP2 to get them to pass a resolution against increasing the retirement age. Not to do anything, just to pass the goddamn resolution. And that's the level of social control that exists in Ireland. Therefore, this social partnership, the culture of naive capitalism, that has had an effect on the Irish population. Now, I believe that is beginning to break down. I think that it's going to be a slow burner. Somebody put it to me, the fuse often takes a long time to burn, but when it does, it will actually explode quite well. And therefore, I think we have to see it's a longer process of revolt coming in Ireland, but in fact that revolt is going to come. And I want to just finish on the last point.